Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 2749, the Food Safety Enhancement Act of 2009. Let me begin by saying that yesterday members from both sides of the aisle rejected the bill that was attempted to be rushed through Congress. Yet today we find ourselves considering the same legislation under a closed rule. Once again, we are barred from offering amendments. I simply have to ask, what's the majority leadership afraid of? We have said before, and I will continue to say again today, this country has the safest food supply in the world. Does that mean that there isn't room for improvement? No. Does that mean that we shouldn't continue to examine our regulatory systems and find ways to make it better? No. I don't think there is a single member of Congress who wouldn't support reasonable proposals that improve the safety of what is already the safest supply of food in the world. But this legislation is woefully inadequate. It fails to achieve what we are all seeking for our consumers, an improved food safety system. The biggest challenge that I can point to is the fact that the bill expands the reach and authority of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, but does not require further accountability. This legislation does not require FDA to spend any additional funds on the inspection of food. Beyond that, there are other provisions that are troublesome. One in particular would mandate that FDA to set on-farm production performance standards. I'm stunned that more people are not outraged by this concept, that the federal government will tell our farmers and ranchers how to do something that they've been doing since the dawn of mankind. Even after changes that will limit the intrusion of the federal government on the farm, the bill still goes too far in the direction of trying to produce food from a bureaucrat's chair in Washington, D.C. There remains a host of other problems with this bill. For example, has anyone considered if it's wise to have the federal government grant licenses and charge fees for processing food? This would mean that the federal government could arbitrarily withdraw that license for technical violations of the law that ultimately would shut down an operation. Has anyone even considered the consequences of the provisions of this bill? Has anyone thought about how this would increase the cost of food for consumers and force food production out of the country? Furthermore, the bill's quarantine authority allows FDA to quarantine the entire nation if there's evidence or just simply justification or information that a food commodity poses a health risk. No consideration is given to economic losses suffered by food producers, processors, distributors. In particular, if the FDA ultimately lifts the quarantine because it was wrong, the agency has no obligation, no authority, or means to indemnify producers for their losses. Mr. Speaker, let me revisit my original point. We have the safest food supply in the world. We need to constantly work to improve our food safety system. But if we are sincere in making those improvements, then we must have a bill before us that is not the product of a rushed legislative process where all the committees of jurisdiction were not allowed to fully participate. Yesterday, with the votes of members of both sides of the aisle, we rejected that process. And today we find ourselves considering the same legislation under a closed rule, once again barred from offering amendments. I repeat, what is the majority afraid of? Food safety should not be a partisan or a political issue. This should not be a fight. It should be a constructive process. Defeat this rule, bring H.R. 2749 back to the committees, let all the committees of jurisdiction work their will and work their way so that we can create a bill that serves farmers, ranchers, processors, retailers, and yes, consumers. Tell me what's wrong with that. Tell me what's wrong with that. Let's defeat the rule. Let's finish the process. Let's do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yield back the balance of my time to the gentlelady from North Carolina.